Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm excited to be back tonight to discuss another Batman story because of the fact that it is still not the end of the 85th anniversary of Batman, everybody. No, no, no. But I'm also really glad because I've got one of my colleagues who I haven't had a good discussion about anything pop culture and comic book related over here on this channel. And that, of course, is Cami. Cami, I hope you're doing well today.
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, just taking every day, one day at a time, just trying to make sure that the little one is happy and that I am happy with my weekly dose of comic books. And I will definitely tell you off the record, there's a lot of really great things happening in comic books right now, at least from what I can tell.
Yeah, I will definitely say this has been a excellent year for comics. Since the beginning of the year, my pull list has doubled. So my brain is happy, my wallet not so much.
Yeah, but you know something? As my mother said when she finally discovered that I had gotten back into comics and saw the numerous amount of short and long boxes in my walk-in closet, and I told her about the fact that I was actually reading all of this stuff and having a really good time and how it was really helping me de-stress from a long day. All she said was, well, at least you're reading something. So that's the most important thing.
That sounds like
So
my mom.
yeah. So when it comes to Batman, we all know, especially from this year alone over here on That's Comical, it's been a great year so far discussing great Batman stories. And believe me, there are so many of them. Iconic moments, iconic characters within the stories of Batman. But there's not just past stories, there's good Batman stories here in the present. And that was one of the things that I specifically wanted to make sure that we brought to the table when we celebrated the 85th anniversary. And we are going to be talking today about one of the newest entries into Batman's lexicon. It came out at the early point of 2024. It was a 3-issue Black Label series, The Batman the First Night, written by Dan Jurgens with penciling by Mike Perkins and inking by Mike Spicer. So two of those three names are names that I personally know and personally am a big fan of. Mike Spicer, if you don't know that name, ladies and gentlemen, if you know the name Daniel Warren Johnson, who is responsible for great things like Jurassic League, Murder Falcon, and of course, right now, the wonderful Transformers comic book over at Image, Mike Spicer does all of the inking for his books. So that is awesome. But Dan Jurgens is a name that I have known ever since I was a kid, but never for Batman. When Dan Jurgens comes into my head, the only thing that pops into my brain is Superman. He and Jerry Ordway and Peter Tomasi, they are responsible, just to name a few, for some truly iconic Superman stories. Dan Jurgens is responsible for the death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen. He is responsible for one of the best Superman runs because of the Rebirth series. He is responsible for introducing us to John Kent. So he is a well-known name and a loved name at that. But when I heard that he was going to be tackling Batman, and not just any version of Batman, we're talking Golden Age Detective Comics 27 Batman. We're talking Batman year one. So let's just say that I got extremely excited. But Cami, I think you might have been a little bit more excited than I am because you came at me with telling me about this book before I told you about it. And you know that I'm usually the one that recommends you stuff. But oh man, the passion, not just in what you were saying, but just what you were actually typing in message boards and stuff. Let me just say that I was very excited to know about how excited you were for this comic book.
Well, as many Batman comics as we have read and you've introduced me to over the years, it's so rare when you get one in your lifetime that's new. And so I was just super excited to see something new. You hear about all these iconic stories, and don't get me wrong, they're iconic and legendary for a reason, but it's really refreshing to see a completely new take on a Batman story that you can say, hey, this kind of happened in my time. So that, coupled with the fact that my favorite comic book artist did his own cover, I got the Ramon Perez, which I'm super excited about, on issue
Beautiful
number
cover.
one. Oh yeah, it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And then just the overall artwork captivated me instantly on this particular one. So I just said, you know what, Steve, if it's not on your radar, let's get it on our radar because I want to read this.
Oh, yeah. And let me just say, that's one of the cornerstones of this book. Mike Perkins, I think this may be the best artwork that he has ever done, because he just captures everything you want to see captured in a Batman story that is taking place in the late 1930s. He captures the noir essence, he captures the settings of Gotham with a beautiful color palette.
Mhm.
And it just, along with the great writing from Dan Jurgens, it's just gorgeous all around. I mean, it's going to be really weird to wonder where this story will be in the next couple of years, like 10 years from now. Will people look at this as one of the greatest Batman stories of all time? I would like to say that I hope so, but it's people like us that need to keep sending out the message of telling people, it's like, when people who have never gotten into comics before, it's hard to get into Batman because you just don't know where to start. But the great thing about characters like Batman is that there are so many standalone stories. And it's those standalone stories that we've even talked about that are so great to read. I mean, considering the fact that we have had so many great discussions with someone like Lindsay, who had not read a Batman comic before, and she appreciated and enjoyed everything that we had brought to the table when she joined us. But no, I personally, after reading it a second time, hope that more people find out about it and more people read it, because it's beautifully done because of how it just captures that 30s old style noir gangster old school golden age Hollywood feel to it. That's what it really feels like to me.
Well, and we actually get Hollywood actors in this too, which I thought was really beautifully incorporated. There's not too much, it doesn't really take front and center, but it's enough of the story to really carry it. And it does give you that ambiance and of the noir and the feeling of everything that was kind of happening during that period. So I would say texturally, artistically, color palette wise, this hits all the marks for me. I think where you and I are going to differ, and this is where the conversation is going to get a little interesting. I didn't think the story held up as well as I had hoped. I'm not saying it's a bad story, but I did have some things that we'll discuss as we kind of break into it that just, I don't know, for Batman, they didn't sit well with me.
And I think I can actually not necessarily disagree with you, because that was going to
Okay.
be one of my interesting questions for you. Because the thing that I loved about the book, again, it's the aesthetic, it's the atmosphere, it's the dialogue. It captures that time period very well. But the nature of the story and the enemy that Batman is facing, to me personally, felt a little out of place. Not saying that it didn't work, but I know about Batman in the golden age of comics, and I know the types of people and foes that he faced and challenges that he faced. But long and short of it, people, he's fighting undead zombies.
Yeah.
Basically, he comes into this story with a very gruesome crime scene. And I will just say one thing, that was I think the part where I said to myself, okay, where are we going with this? Because this is something that I did not expect. The surprise was very interesting. Also, the artwork on a beheaded person was gorgeous, even though I'm not necessarily one that appreciates gore, but we're talking to the resident scream queen of That's Comical here. So it was something that was completely out of the blue. And then we find out that there is a very strange paranormal kind of horror activity at work. And that's where you get thrown off a little bit, but you still want to keep reading it.
Oh, absolutely. I was hooked from the beginning, and I do want to point out I absolutely love the newspapers. This was throughout all three of the issues, and I love it when there's so much very specific detail given to a comic book like this, because honestly you could spend a good 30 minutes just looking at these, and it gives you kind of that feeling of getting into the era that you're about to step into. So the fact that they did that as an opener, artistically genius. I thoroughly enjoyed book one. I will say by far my favorite of the three.
I agree.
I think that there wasn't too much that kind of threw me off. I absolutely loved the way it ended. I was excited for more. I was like, yes, give me book two. I couldn't wait for it to print. And then it was kind of at the end of book two that I was like, where are we going with this? But I think that for what book one did for me, and for any reader out there, watching this and listening to us banter about this, I think book one will captivate you enough to read the series. And I always say this to people, I implore you, read it for yourself. Don't just go off of what we say. Our opinions are our own, and we're going to formulate those based off of our own tastes and interests. So I think for the horror element of this, given that it was a black label, I was expecting it. It just, like you said, it just seems a bit out of place. Now, we've seen DC do this many times, especially in animated films, where you'll have something that doesn't quite fit the era, that doesn't quite fit the timepiece, but they make it work. I just think this fell a little flat for me, because given the fact that it almost feels like we have three separate stories happening here. We have this very deep rooted Batman story where we kind of almost get a side of Batman we don't normally see. He's getting very personable about his parents, about how that affected him. He's having this really intimate conversation with this rabbi, whom I absolutely loved. I think he was
Yeah.
probably one of my favorite characters beyond Commissioner Gordon. I just think the way Gordon looked in this, the way he carried himself, the dialogue. So I think that really, in essence, gave me a couple of characters that I cared about. I was vested in. I really wanted to kind of see those characters through, what their storyline meant. However, you've got these undead creatures. You've got Batman kind of giving us a little bit more than we're used to, almost to an uncomfortable point. And then you've got this rabbi. Like, how does he fit in? What's going on? And we all know what we're on the cusp of. At the end of the 1930s, especially with the headlines of the newspapers in these, we know what we're looking to, in terms of the war that they're referencing. That said, I think in a way sometimes even alluding small bits and pieces to certain stories, it's too much. Like, let's just focus on one or two things. There was a lot of muchness happening in this comic, and a lot of it just didn't go anywhere for me. I just felt like a lot of it was very unflushed, very unfinished, and it didn't really pair well in some instances.
Agree with you in regards to Commissioner Gordon. I mean, I was also really surprised that he was the commissioner at the time, because when you take a look at some of the other previous books with the lore, he's not the commissioner when Batman is officially on the streets. But still, it doesn't matter, because the point that we're trying to get across with Commissioner Gordon is, in a place like Gotham City that is so crime ridden, and how the cops are so corrupt, we have to get that straight arrow cop, and that's who Jim is. Now, the Rabbi Jacob Cohen, that was a character that shocked me personally, because now it is the weirdest thing to say that I now know that Gotham City has a synagogue. That is something that and again, it's also not necessarily, I think, if I were to really sit down with Dan Jurgens and ask him questions about why he chose a character like Jacob Cohn, was that because of the fact that we're trying to pay tribute to the fact that Bob Kane and Bill Finger were two Jewish men that created Batman? Because that is the truth. I mean, the same thing with Superman, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster. Most of the classic comic book characters that we know about were actually created by Jewish men, and to sometimes women as well. I mean, we all have to remember that Stan Lee is like the grandfather of Marvel Comics, but also someone who is somewhat proud of his Jewish roots. The fact that Jack Kirby is responsible for so many different creations, and he's also a Jewish man who was also very proud of his Jewish roots. So I don't know if that was one of the reasons why Dan Jurgens decided to put this character in there, but we also needed a character like that because Alfred isn't there. And why is Alfred not there? Because Alfred wasn't there at the beginning in the world of Batman comics. The same reason why Superman can fly is the reason why Alfred exists. Alfred was introduced in the radio serials. So it's something that was not there in the beginning. So the fact that Dan Jurgens is also really trying to play on what exactly Batman was as a comic book and a character when he was first introduced. So I like that as well. Also, speaking of radio, radio is something that is very much predominant in this book. But again, radio was a predominant force in the world of popular culture at the time. If you wanted to know what was going on, you listened to the radio. So I love the fact that you heard the news broadcast throughout the entire book. Again, that's again, I'm going to constantly sound like a broken record here. What wins me over with this book, even though it's not perfect, is the aesthetic. I personally feel that Dan Jurgens captured 1939 Batman beautifully. I really, really do. And yes, I do appreciate the fact that you did mention that with Rabbi Cohen being a voice and a compassionate person for Batman to talk to, he's also alluding to the fact that there is dark forces taking place over in Europe. There was one specific thing that is mentioned at the end of the third book that I don't know if you're aware of it, but I know that it's something that I know about, and that's the fact that there's a news broadcast about the SS St. Louis being turned away from the United States. I mean,
That
that's
that
something that I learned in
mm.
school way too many times for my own good.
Yes, that really there is a couple of points in here where my heart just kind of stopped for a second, and that was definitely one of them because I know that's an actual historical event, and to know that we could have possibly saved generations just from taking in that ship alone, it breaks my heart. And the fact that he included that really does give you that cast of darkness that this book needs. So it's little subtle details like that that absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned radio, I want to also point out in a way the villain is faceless, and I love that because you always had a radio personality that you didn't really know what they looked like. You only know what the sound of their voice was, and that was comforting to you. So to kind of get that essence from the villain in this story and know that he's a comfort to many, but he's the bad guy, really does give that cast of shadow that this story needs. And it's all very dark ink, which
Yeah.
it keeps that dark element throughout, from the streets of Gotham when the conversations are being had, even in Wayne Manor, everything
Yeah.
is very dark.
Well, it's supposed to explain and exemplify the fact that this is a single man living in a big house all to himself. So you can definitely find a lot of dark corners just because, not everything is completely uncovered when you're just one person living in a big house. And yes, I will agree with you that at the end of the first book, you definitely are enticed. You definitely want to read on merely because of the fact that Batman has discovered his first clue in this big caper, and that is the fact that the people who he is fighting when they are classified as the undead are people that he knows were imprisoned in Blackgate and sent to the electric chair, and he tries to stop a killing in the chair one night, and he ends up getting busted, I guess is the right choice of words. And they try to kill him in the electric chair. And that's the final moment in the first book. And you're like, okay, what's going on next?
In a way, I was kind of expecting Batman to come back something supernatural in book 2. I mean, I'm not gonna say my heart didn't kind of hope for that in a way. I'm just given the last scene and you're just like, okay, has he become something else? But then you start book 2 and you see the human element. It really just solidified what would happen to any other person, which is Burns. And then that kind of gets us a little deeper into the Julie Madison,
Yep.
tie-in. And that's kind of where I go a little sideways in book 2. I know Batman's a player. I know Batman has a list of lovers. This is the first time though, and maybe I just haven't read all the Batman stories that are out there, but this is the first time you get a glimpse of Batman in the nude, and you get a glimpse of Batman in an actual sexual encounter scene, and I was very turned off by that. For me as a female, I love the fact that knowing Bruce Wayne is a playboy. I love knowing that Bruce Wayne has all of these relations and relationships, and they're all very different. And honestly, I think that that's what builds him and makes him part of who he is. However, as a female, I didn't need to see that. I just I want to kind of take away that tone of female, because I know some females live for that. There's all those kind of erotic kind of books out there, especially when it comes to paranormal and horror. But when it comes to my Batman, I don't need to see skin. I don't need to see his lover on his lap. That is something that I want my imagination to allude to when his door closes and we go to the next scene. Like, I know what's happening behind closed doors. I don't need to see it.
Okay, so then I'm definitely going to tell you never read Batman Damned. Never read
Uh-oh.
Batman Damned, because the reason why that book is so well known and so popular is because that is the very first time we ever saw Batman's penis.
Really?
Yeah, apparently that made history. I never read it. I was never
Okay.
interested. I did not want to see Batman's Dark Knight. Thank you very much. But I just yeah, I had a feeling you were gonna get it. That was a complete random joke. I'm glad you enjoyed that one. But long and the short of it is, I enjoyed the Julie Madison character for what she was, because of the fact that she sort of reminded me of an Andrea Beaumont character from Batman Mask of the Phantasm, because here was someone who was trying to get to know Bruce Wayne, because even though when she is first introduced, it's sort of on somewhat hostile circumstances. But then when she starts to see that this is a man that is more than what he seems, and when she actually discovers that he is also the man behind the mask. I mean, am I happy about the fact that she now knows that he is Batman? I'm not going to say that it like completely destroyed the story for me, but I will have to admit I did sort of find I, if I'm going to give you the right choice of words, I'm going to probably say a little bit of a romantic feel of her draped in the cape and cowl. There was just something about it that just seemed very old fashioned. And it was just something that I sort of felt a little nostalgic for when it comes to the fact, like, I am someone that now feels, as the grand movie buff that I am, I feel that all the greatest movies came out before 1967. So it just felt old, classic Golden Age Hollywood to me for some reason.
So that said, put your mind into the pictures at that time. We weren't seeing skin on skin the way we see it today in cinema. Cinema was very use your imagination. You know, you would see parts and pieces of the feminine physique, but they left much to the imagination. And I guess that's really what my feeling was behind this. It's not Julie Madison as a character herself. I loved her character and I very much appreciated the way she kind of made Batman feel very comfortable. Or I say Batman, but really it was Bruce. She spent a considerable amount of nursing him back to health and ensuring that he was mind body, you know, completely present. I don't necessarily think that it was a perfect choice to give away his secret, especially so quickly. But given that it's only a three-part series, I mean, you had to kind of move things along. And I will say, after the scene that I'm alluding to, there was a scene the following morning where you're talking about kind of, dressing herself or covering herself up, where she walks from the manor to the barn. And that's a beautiful thing because that is how you envisioned and the women were encapsulated during those types of scenes. That's perfect. I'm specifically referencing that, and it's just a small little picture. I mean, you have to blink to really see it, where he's sitting on a chair and she's sitting on his lap, and then you can kind of see her bare back and derriere. Again, it's classy, it's tasteful, but it wasn't necessary to me. Like, just let my imagination do the work. But
And
I think everything else was great.
because, that's a little something that I did say that to me, I mean, like maybe it's just a little bit of nitpicking. So I'm glad that you mentioned something like that. There were a very few amount of times. I think this may have been only maybe two or three times when something modern was somewhat forced into the story. I got really upset when Batman encounters Rabbi Cohn for the first time, and in one of the word bubbles, they talk about the America First agenda. Like when I
There
read
you go.
that part,
That's my next pet
I
peeve.
was like, Dan
That's my
Jurgens, I
next
don't know
pet
where
peeve.
your politics lie, but I don't like people trying
Yes.
to rope modern day things
Yes.
into a period that is supposed to be a different time and a different place.
1000%. That was exactly my turning point of irritation. You see this happening frequently now, not only in comic books, but also in novelization, where the political ideologies and opinions of writers are finding their way to the pages. And I cannot express this, and I've said it so many times on so many different platforms. We read this to escape. We do not read these to relive our realities. We have too much going on out here right now. There is just so much going on in the world. It is heavy. We are in a very heavy political climate once again, and it's about to get ugly. And I don't need that in my comic books.
Yeah.
That happened twice. There was the American agenda that was pushed in this, and there was also some policing, if you felt that also, that there was a couple of comments made there as well. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and good on you for it, for wanting to live in it, but keep it out of the comic books. We are so tired, and I think I can say that we are so tired, not just you and I, but just the readers in general, of having to be forced to have people's opinions just shoved down our throat when all we're trying to do is have a source of entertainment. Now, I've heard the other side of that, where people say, well, you can't escape it. It is what it is. It's reality. And people,
Yeah.
despite their opinions, are human, and that's going to come out. It's human nature. No, those were legitimate pushes on a one side of the coin or the other, and
If,
that I'm over
if
it.
that statement is supposed to be entirely true, then why is it that when you take a look at the year 2024 and you take a look at what people think are some of the best movies of the year, those movies do not have any political things in there. I mean, the number one movie in America right now is Inside Out 2. And I say to people, and I've even had this conversation with my wife so many times, oh, knowing the mindset that Disney is in right now, oh, they could have gone in so many different directions, and yet they did not. They wanted to make a successful film. You have to accommodate to everybody's liking if you want to be a truly successful movie.
And aside from jargon and the writing of the films, let's look to something that just recently came out just a couple weeks ago, Beetlejuice. One of the things that the cast said that they absolutely loved was Tim Burton's push to not do so much CGI. And what are we flocking to? These movies that are giving us just the down home, props, the good old days where the stages were created with human hands and the props were made with human hands. We don't need all of this extra. Not everything needs to be embellished. You don't need to see everything, blow up and be sparkly all the time. Sometimes when we as moviegoers want to feel the nostalgia, we just really want to go back to the simplicity of film and, you know, going back into dialogue. That's why we go to these films, because again, we're so sick and tired of turning on the TV and all you hear is the same old arguments, you see the same faces, and it's just all dreary and depressing. We want our entertainment to include our comic books, to not be force feeding and shoving this down our throats repetitively. It's really going to at some point be a negative thing for, I think, comic book writers. I think some people might see this as a trend with some writers and they might not pick up their books like they used to, because we know what's coming. I hope that's not the case. I don't have a lot of experience with Dan Jurgens, but as they say, everybody gets older, their tastes are modified, and sometimes it just happens. We either love it, we hate it, we support it, we don't. And I think that's where we show that we will support it, is with our pocketbook.
Well, I mean, let's also be a little bit lighthearted and comical here at the end of the day. The most important thing is those little things that he put in there were so subtle. So the fact that we're talking about it, if he ever gets a chance to watch this basically means, Dan, we actually read your book.
You are
We paid
absolutely right.
attention.
Yeah, they were very minute, and we are definitely making a mountain out of a molehill here. But again, I think that comes from a deeper rooted place for me personally, because I've seen this, like I said, a lot recently with other authors that I love, and I'm just like, you're entitled. I get it. You get to a certain level in your writing. People are going to buy your books based on your name alone, but stop. Just enough is enough. We don't need to relive the what is happening now every day in our writing, especially when it's a timepiece. Let's keep it authentic to the time.
Yeah.
There was something though very, very awesome, and again, it was one of those heart-stopping moments for me, and that was between Batman and Cone when they were having a conversation about weaponry and guns, and he being Bruce Wayne, but being Batman in its form, having the conversation. He said no guns, and very adamantly to him, and he said something very impactful that just, it really stuck with me through the whole series, and it said, it betrayed the most impactful moment of my life. And I have never once thought about that, because obviously Bruce Wayne uses all these really cool gadgets, but of course we never see him use guns. And so to see real guns, being presented, they were obviously in Wayne Manor and all of these things, but for him to say it like that, it just really took me back to the moment where his parents were taken from him and how they were taken, and it just completely reshaped that whole situation for me. And just again, those one liners, despite whatever the subject matter is, it does go to show you that Dan Jurgens is very powerful and packs a punch in his writing, because it just takes those very subtle things to really just stay with you throughout the series.
So a very interesting thing about that, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was going to be the next topic, because that's how the second book ends.
Mhm.
Batman is getting closer and closer. He now has an encounter with Johnny the Whip, who apparently seems to be the puppet master in this operation, or at least the number one to the main villain in command. And at the end of the second book, he actually starts loading a gun. Now,
Yes.
why is that so important? Cammy, I don't know if you knew this, but at the very beginning, in the early years of Batman, Batman actually carried and used a gun.
Did
So
not know that.
this, so once again, props to Dan Jurgens for actually really, again, what a lot of people loved so much about the book was the fact that he even got like the original Batman costume right. Because like everybody that I saw reviews for this book in YouTube, and they all said I love the fact that he even remembered the purple gloves because yes, Batman had bright purple gloves at the very beginning when he had his Batman costume. So then when we get into the third book, after what happens with Johnny the Whip, we learn a little bit more. And also, we completely forgot to mention a couple of other characters. There's the Warden of Blackgate, and then there's also the guy who, and then there's Maxie. You know, we never really talked about Maxie at all.
Oh yes, Maxie is a special character. There's just he's got a really good heart. He doesn't have the best profession, but
You know,
in a way it suits him because it allots him to be the protector of those women. But he's kind of like a protector of Gotham in a way, you know, without the cape, without the mask. And yeah, I really did enjoy his character too, so I'm glad you're bringing him to the forefront.
yeah, because he plays a very big role towards the end. Because
Yes.
unfortunately, the person who does in fact get caught up in some of this trouble, even though he really is an innocent bystander here, is Rabbi Cohn. He gets encountered by a lot of gangsters, and then all of a sudden, Batman basically goes to Maxie and says, "You know, Rabbi Jacob Cohn, you need to keep him and his synagogue safe." And then he says to me, "Why should I do that?" He goes, "Because you know your name is Kirschbaum." Like I thought that another very interesting twist there. I really liked
Yeah.
that.
And you know, it's a good point. I know we've moved on to book three, but again, as alluded in book one, that very last image really pulled me into the story and brought me into wanting to get to book two. Book two did the exact same thing because seeing Bruce with the gun in his hand or Batman with the gun in his hand, I'm like, okay, but you just said it would completely change the impact of, you know, the situation that basically created you behind this mask, and now you've got a gun in your hand. Where are we going with this? And I was incorrect. That nude scene actually happens in book three, not book two. The relationship develops, but it's actually very early in book three. So maybe that's why I was thinking it was book
That's
two.
fine. That's fine.
But yeah, I mean, I think for the continuation of this series, both one and two did a great job of wanting you to want more.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, again, the paranormal stuff with the undead, you know, as it does seem a little off color, it doesn't take away from the overall
Mm.
feel of the book. And I'm sure I said that already, but that's again, broken record, the aesthetic, the atmosphere, that's what does this book justice. So, of course, what do we get at the end of this book? We find out what the motives are for this person who is actually creating all of these undead guys. It was a little bit interesting when we find out who the main villain actually is in this whole story. And his motivations, again, what I like about this specific thing is that it's so over the top, you know, like he's just one of those straight up villains that just wants to take over Gotham. I mean, but you know, that once again captures maybe not necessarily the golden age of comic books, but definitely the silver age of comic books. It's classic super villain villainy. And quite frankly, I'm one of those people that just eats that stuff up because I love myself a good old fashioned campy supervillain who's twiddling the mustache with a sinister laugh. You know, I love that stuff. You know, it's so cheesy, it's childish, but that is what I lived for when I was a little kid. That's what I grew up on. And that's why, to me, it's still, once again, at the end, it sort of kind of fits in with the whole aesthetic feel of the book.
No, I agree. Again, it's just the zombie-like creatures. They do feel a little odd, but if you kind of look at the ambiance around that character or those characters, because there's really only like 3 or 4 that we focus on during the duration of the story. You do have a very real feeling for that era of the gangster versus the cop, and that dirty street business that was kind of happening around. So the zombies, although they feel a little out of place, I mean, the rest of what's happening around these characters makes a lot of sense. And then you get to who the actual culprit of this is, the voice, and you're like, okay, it does all make sense. The I guess again, for a little bit of story tweak, where I kind of was like, this is weird, is that you have the voice kind of ratifying this concept and idea that he wants to take over Gotham. He wants to be the ruler, the one, basically. Let's eliminate all the politicians, all the police, the commissioner, the whole nine, the mayor. Let's just wipe them out, and then you all are going to answer to me. Which I loved how the people of Gotham was like, no, that is not going to happen. We're not going to answer to you. It cannot be controlled by one man. So that does show you some kind of sense of democracy. If we're going to focus on the agenda we alluded to earlier, you do still have the people standing up for justice. But what was interesting to me is, and again, this is not a dig on the writing, this is like now a dig at the villain. Like, the concept that he had behind this is, I want to create this, you have this illusion of a war that's happening nationwide behind the scenes, but then I want to create this war, and I want to fight for this idea and this concept that we're going to make the people pay that send your boys to war. But yet he's kind of pushing the same agenda on the people of Gotham by creating these zombies and saying, you're going to fight for me and you're going to fight in my war. Like, how is your war any different than that war? So it was just kind of a little confusing there. Like, a war is a war no matter how you slice it. And if we really
Because
want to
the
talk about,
yeah. Yeah, it's simply because of the fact that what does any person want to do when there is vulnerability? They want to take control of the people through fear.
oh
Fear
yeah,
of
absolutely.
the other. It's again, it's classic, it's so cliche, but again, it's so classic supervillain. It's just what they do. But again, it's also what some of the real villains in this world did, like
Right.
it's kind of funny because like what actually could be a villain these days, it's like you could look at all of the politicians in America and the big banks during the recession of 2008. We passed the bailout package because we scared all the American people, like saying, do you really want the banks to fail? Like, do you want this to really happen? And
Right.
so, because people didn't want to lose, like, were they going to lose their 401ks and their pensions? We don't know. But it's through fear that they did what they did. That's the
Right.
reason why we invaded Afghanistan, because of what happened on 9/11. So fear is one of the most powerful weapons that, if you know how to harness it and take control, you can become a very dangerous person. Not just because of the fact that what you're trying to do you might think may be the right thing to do, but the problem is you are not necessarily looked at by everybody else the same way. You may think that what you're doing is right, but how does the rest of the world, how does the rest of the human race think about you? Not everybody agrees with what you're doing.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point, because if you look at any horrible villain in history, realistic history, they thought they were on the right side of the law too. They saw it from their point of view and their perspective. So it shouldn't be any different for our fictitious villains as well. So that's a very good point. It's a really interesting story. It definitely takes some twists and turns. At the end of the day, it's not a bad story to avoid because of those minor, little infractions that we're talking about. And again, I think the things that we're talking about are not so epic. They're just our own personal opinions based on our reading and our experience as we're reading through the story. But it visually, I think it's probably one of the most beautiful comic books I've laid my eyes on in a long time.
Liked how it ended. I really do appreciate the fact that it ended very subtle about how
Mhm.
the rabbi actually, because now that he knows that he also is Bruce Wayne, he actually invited Bruce Wayne to join his family for a Shabbat dinner, which I thought was really nice. And at the end of the day, Batman is just Batman, and he just goes right back onto the rooftops and hangs with the gargoyles, and you hear the Shirley Walker music in the background.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think that this is a good story. I think it's one that I would definitely recommend for people to pick up. Visually very appeasing. The coloring is very appeasing, and overall, it is a very interesting take on obviously some very classic Batman elements, and perhaps it just does have that spin of modern that just maybe didn't resonate with the both of us, but maybe it will resonate with others.
Yeah, I mean, I love I went and got the A covers. I absolutely love Mike Perkins's covers on all three of these books. I just think that the design is so sublime and beautiful. And, I don't really know if we'll ever get, you see, I don't know if we'll ever get another story like this ever. I really don't. This was a very unique, standout take on Batman. And I'm just glad that it was done by, again, I know that you once had this conversation with me. I get a little bit nervous when it comes to finding people who I do not know in terms of writing or artwork or anything like that. But, you know, it also really depends on what the story is about. That's really what is going to grab me. Like if it's got I wanted to read this book simply because I never saw Dan Jurgens write a Batman story before. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this guy is a Superman writer to me. Mike Spicer, I knew very well because of all the work that he's done with Daniel Warren Johnson. So I knew I was going to be going into something special. And regardless of how it all came out in the end, I just appreciate one of those stories that encapsulates a time period. We don't really get many of those these days in comics.
No, that's very true. And I think that's initially what had drawn me to it is the idea that we were getting kind of an old time feeling. And I knew I would have you hook, line, and sinker as soon as I saw Dan Jurgens' name on it. I was like, it doesn't matter if he likes it or not. Jurgens is on it. And I know Steve will read it with me now.
Well, I will definitely say to sum things up, compared to the other brand new Batman story that is happening as we speak, which is Batman Gotham by Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age. This book right now, I will say, is 10 times better than the Kryptonian Age because I'm already on issue number 4. I appreciate some of the things the story is doing, but all in all, I am not really in thinking that it's one of the best Batman stories that I ever read. Batman the First Night, on the other hand, there's good stuff here. Definitely a good story. Definitely something that is worth rereading, and definitely something checking out if you've never read a Batman story before.
Definitely.
So that's going to wrap it up, everybody. Another great discussion about Batman celebrating his 85th anniversary. I am looking forward to the next time that whether it's me and Cammy or Andy and I, or more than us, there's a couple more Batman things that we would like to do over here on the channel before the 85th anniversary officially is done with in 2025. We've got 3 more really great Batman projects in the works, people, and we really are hoping you're looking forward to them. So in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Leave your comments in the box below. Click the subscriber button and the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content, and we will see you in the next one.
Bye.